The fluorescent lights of the Sunrise Café buzzed overhead as my sister Amanda leaned across the sticky formica table, her voice dropping to what she thought was a whisper. "Natalie, we need to talk about your little business," she said, air quoting the word business with perfectly manicured nails, the late-night phone calls, the cash you're always carrying, the way you disappear for days at a time. She paused, glancing around the nearly empty diner before continuing. "We know you're dealing drugs and honestly, we're thinking about calling the police. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you." I nearly choked on my coffee. Here I was, Special Agent Natalie Brooks of the Phoenix DEA field office, being threatened with arrest by my own family for the very crimes I'd spent the last 8 years putting people behind bars for. The irony was so thick, I could taste it. Bitter as the burnt coffee cooling in my cup. 3 hours earlier, I'd been sitting in an unmarked surveillance van outside a warehouse in South Phoenix, watching through binoculars as our target loaded kilos of heroin into the back of a pickup truck. My earpiece crackled with updates from Agent Rodriguez, my partner of 5 years, as we coordinated with local law enforcement to make the bust. The operation had taken 6 months of undercover work, countless sleepless nights, and more close calls than I cared to remember. When we finally moved in, 37 people were arrested, and we seized enough fentanyl to kill half of Arizona. Now here I sat in a diner that smelled like grease and disappointment, being lectured about my criminal lifestyle by people who thought they knew me but couldn't have been more wrong if they'd tried. Amanda's husband Kevin nodded along beside her, his weak chin bobbing like a dashboard ornament as she spoke. My younger sister Rachel stared into her untouched pie, refusing to make eye contact with anyone. Mom sat at the end of the booth, her lips pressed into that thin line she'd perfected during my teenage years when she'd decided I was heading down the wrong path. The worst part wasn't their accusations. It was the smug certainty in Amanda's voice, the way she'd clearly rehearsed this speech, probably in front of her bathroom mirror while practicing different angles of righteous indignation. She'd always been the golden child, the one who married the insurance adjuster and bought the house in Scottsdale with the 3-car garage and the community pool. She'd never understood why I'd chosen a different path, why I'd turned down her offer to get me a job at Kevin's firm doing data entry and filing. What she didn't know was that I'd graduated summa cum laude from Arizona State with a degree in criminal justice, that I'd spent 2 years at the DEA Academy in Quantico, that I held commendations from the Attorney General and had been personally thanked by the governor for my work dismantling trafficking networks that had been poisoning communities across the Southwest. She didn't know that the suspicious cash she'd seen me with was evidence money from operations, carefully documented and tracked by federal accountants. She didn't know that my irregular schedule wasn't because I was meeting dealers in dark alleys, but because I was often the dealer in those dark alleys, wearing a wire and risking my life to gather intelligence that would save countless others. The leather jacket draped over the back of my chair had belonged to my father, a mechanic who'd worked honest jobs his entire life and taught me that sometimes the right thing to do wasn't the easy thing to do. He died when I was 22, just as I was starting my career with the DEA, and he'd never gotten to see what I'd become. Amanda had always hated that jacket, said it made me look like a criminal. She had no idea how close to the truth that was, or how far from. "The neighbors are starting to talk," Kevin added, his voice barely above a whisper. "Mrs. Patterson saw you coming home at 3 in the morning last Tuesday with what looked like a duffel bag, and Tom Bradley said he's seen different cars dropping you off at all hours." He paused, adjusting his glasses nervously. "People are starting to ask questions, Natalie, questions we can't answer." I wanted to laugh. Mrs. Patterson had seen me returning from a raid where we'd arrested 15 members of a methamphetamine distribution ring. The duffel bag had contained my tactical gear and surveillance equipment. The different cars were DEA vehicles, deliberately rotated to avoid establishing patterns that could compromise operations. Tom Bradley, the self-appointed neighborhood watch captain, had actually been helpful without knowing it. His detailed observations had helped us identify potential security leaks in our transportation protocols, but I couldn't tell them any of that. My cover required absolute secrecy. Not just from criminals but from everyone in my personal life. The people I arrested often had connections, resources, and long memories. Keeping my family in the dark wasn't just protocol, it was protection. For them and for me. We've talked about this as a family, Mom finally spoke, her voice carrying the weight of maternal disappointment that had followed me since high school. We think you need help. Professional help, and if you won't get it voluntarily, then maybe some time in county jail will give you the perspective you need. The words hung in the air like smoke from a gun that had just been fired. My own mother, the woman who'd raised me to believe in justice and doing the right thing, was threatening to have me arrested for crimes I'd dedicated my life to stopping. The universe had a twisted sense of humor. Rachel finally looked up from her pie, tears streaming down her face. Nat, please, she whispered. Just tell us it's not true. Tell us you're not dealing drugs, and we'll believe you. We just need to hear you say it. I met her eyes across the table, seeing the little girl who used to follow me around the backyard, begging to be included in whatever adventure I was planning. She'd grown up to be a kindergarten teacher, spending her days shaping young minds and believing in the inherent goodness of people. How could I explain to her that the world was darker than she imagined, that there were people out there who would sell poison to children for profit, that sometimes the only way to stop them was to become them, at least on the surface? I'm not a drug dealer, I said simply, because it was the truth, even if it wasn't the whole truth. Amanda leaned back, crossing her arms. Then explain the money. Explain the phone calls. Explain why you can't tell us where you work or what you do for a living. Explain why you've been lying to us for years. The questions came rapid fire, each one hitting closer to home than the last. She was right about the lying. Of course, I'd been lying to them for 8 years, crafting elaborate cover stories about working for a private security company, traveling for corporate clients, dealing with confidential matters that I couldn't discuss. The lies had started small, innocent omissions about the nature of my work, but they'd grown into a complex web of deception that had created exactly the kind of suspicion I'd been trying to avoid. The irony was suffocating. In my real life, I was surrounded by criminals who trusted me completely. Drug dealers invited me to their homes, introduced me to their families, confided their deepest secrets, because they believed I was one of them. But my own family, the people who should have known me best, had convinced themselves I was exactly the kind of person I spent my days hunting. I pulled my phone from my pocket, feeling the familiar weight of the encrypted device that connected me to a world they couldn't imagine. 3 missed calls from Rodriguez, probably wondering why I'd missed our debrief. A text message from my supervisor about tomorrow's operation. Another message from the task force coordinator about new intelligence on a cartel shipment coming through Tucson. While my family sat here planning my intervention, real criminals were moving real drugs through real communities, and I was the one who was supposed to stop them. You know what the saddest part is? Amanda continued, her voice rising slightly as other diners began to turn and stare. Dad would be so disappointed. He worked his whole life to give us a good name, and you're throwing it all away for what? Quick money? Street credibility? What's so important that you'd risk everything our family stands for? That hit harder than anything else she could have said. Dad had been my hero. The man who'd taught me to change my own oil and stand up for people who couldn't stand up for themselves. He'd been the one who'd encouraged me to study criminal justice, who'd said the world needed more people willing to stand between the innocent and those who would hurt them. If he could see me now, sitting in this diner being accused by his daughters of betraying everything he'd taught us, would he be proud or heartbroken? The truth was, he probably would have been proud, not of the deception, not of the pain I was causing my family, but of the work itself. The kids whose schools were safer because we'd removed dealers from the playgrounds, the families whose neighborhoods were more secure because we'd dismantled the networks that had been terrorizing them, the communities that would never know how close they'd come to disaster because we'd intercepted shipments before they reached the streets. But sitting here, watching my mother's disappointed face and my sister's tears, it was hard to feel proud of anything. The job required sacrifices, and I'd always known that. What I hadn't expected was how much it would hurt to be exactly what my family thought I was, a stranger. Kevin cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable with the emotions swirling around the table. Look, Natalie, We've already talked to a lawyer. If you're arrested, it's going to be in the papers. Amanda's firm, my company, Mom's book club, all of it's going to come out. The shame alone could ruin us. There it was. Not concern for my well-being or fear for my safety, but worry about how my alleged crimes would affect their social standing. Amanda worked for a prestigious law firm in downtown Phoenix, the kind of place where appearance mattered more than substance. Kevin sold insurance to other middle-class families who expected their agents to be respectable, trustworthy, above reproach. Mom's social circle consisted of other retirees who spent their days gossiping over coffee and competing to see whose children had achieved the most conventional success. They weren't wrong to be concerned. If I actually were a drug dealer, if I were arrested and convicted, it would devastate their carefully constructed lives. But they weren't concerned enough to consider that maybe, just maybe, they didn't have the whole story. We want to help you, Rachel said, reaching across the table to touch my hand, but you have to let us. You have to stop lying and tell us what's really going on. I looked down at her hand covering mine, remembering when she'd done the same thing during our father's funeral. She'd been 19 then, just a sophomore in college studying elementary education because she wanted to make a difference in children's lives. I'd been 22, fresh out of the academy, and eager to start making a difference in the world. We'd both been naive about what making a difference actually cost. The truth was sitting right there on the tip of my tongue. I could pull out my badge, show them my credentials, explain everything. The relief on their faces would be worth almost anything. But protocol existed for a reason, and that reason was sitting in a federal prison cell in Florence, Arizona. Agent Sarah Martinez had broken protocol 3 years ago, told her husband about an operation to make him stop asking questions about her schedule. Her husband had mentioned it to his brother, who'd mentioned it to a friend, who'd mentioned it to someone with connections to the cartel we were investigating. Sarah had been pulled from the field permanently, and it had taken 2 years to rebuild the intelligence network that had been compromised. More importantly, the people we'd been tracking had disappeared into the wind, taking their operation with them. Street-level dealers we could replace overnight, but the high-level organizers who had vanished because of Sarah's disclosure were still out there, still moving product, still destroying lives. The last intelligence report had placed them in Mexico, probably planning their return to American markets with new routes and new connections. I can't tell you what you want to hear, I said finally, because it was true even if the reasons weren't what they thought. Amanda's face hardened. Then we're done here, Mom. Give her the ultimatum. Mom straightened in her seat, putting on the voice she'd used when we were children and had disappointed her beyond measure. Natalie, you have 48 hours to get your life together. Check yourself into rehab, turn yourself in to the police, do whatever you need to do to fix this mess you've made. If you don't, we'll be forced to take action ourselves. What kind of action? I asked, though I was pretty sure I already knew. We're going to call the DEA, Kevin said, adjusting his glasses again. Amanda looked it up online. There's a tip line for reporting suspected drug dealers. They take anonymous calls, and they investigate. The absurdity of the situation hit me like a physical blow. My family was threatening to report me to my own agency. I imagined the call being routed to Rodriguez's desk, imagined him taking notes as Amanda described her suspicions about her sister's criminal activities. Would he recognize my description? Would he have to recuse himself from the investigation? Would some other agent be assigned to investigate me, only to discover that I was already investigating myself? You'd really do that? I asked. You'd really report your own sister to federal agents? If that's what it takes to save you from yourself, Amanda replied without hesitation, and to protect our family's reputation. There it was again, their reputation, their standing in the community, their carefully maintained facade of respectability. Not my safety, not my well-being, not even my freedom, but their own comfort and social status. I stood up slowly, pulling my father's jacket over my shoulders. The worn leather was soft and familiar, a reminder of who I'd been before I'd become this compartmentalized version of myself. 48 hours, I repeated. 48 hours, Mom confirmed. Don't make us choose between you and doing the right thing, Natalie, because we will choose the right thing. I walked out of the Sunrise Café feeling lighter and heavier at the same time. Lighter because the charade was almost over, heavier because of what would happen when it ended. My phone buzzed with another text from Rodriguez, this one marked urgent. Another operation, another chance to do the job I'd sworn to do, another opportunity to make a difference in a world that desperately needed people willing to stand between good and evil. The desert air was crisp against my face as I climbed into my car, a nondescript sedan that looked exactly like what a mid-level drug dealer might drive. In the glove compartment, hidden beneath registration papers and insurance documents, was my real identification. Special Agent Natalie Brooks, Drug Enforcement Administration, badge number 7. 8 years of service, dozens of successful operations, hundreds of arrests, and a commendation record that would make any law enforcement officer proud. But sitting in that parking lot, watching my family through the diner window as they continued their discussion without me, I felt like the criminal they thought I was, not because of what I'd done, but because of what I'd had to become to do. The job had required me to be someone else for so long, that sometimes I forgot who I really was underneath all the lies and cover stories. My phone rang, Rodriguez's name appearing on the caller ID. Brooks here, I answered, slipping back into my professional voice. Where the hell are you? He asked, concern evident, despite his attempt at humor. You missed the debrief, and we've got new intelligence on the Morales operation. Family emergency, I said, which wasn't entirely untrue. I'll be in the office in 30 minutes. Everything okay? Rodriguez knew better than most what this job cost the people who did it. He'd been divorced twice, both times because his wives couldn't handle the secrecy and unpredictability of undercover work. Define okay, I replied, starting the engine and pulling out of the parking lot. As I drove toward downtown Phoenix, the city lights beginning to twinkle in the gathering dusk, I thought about the choice my family had given me: 48 hours to confess to crimes I hadn't committed, or face the consequences of their betrayal. What they didn't understand was that I'd already been facing consequences for 8 years, the loneliness of living a double life, the constant stress of maintaining cover stories, the fear that one mistake could cost not just my career but my life. But there were other consequences too. The satisfaction of seeing a drug dealer sentenced to federal prison, the relief in a mother's eyes when we removed dealers from her child's school, the knowledge that somewhere, in communities I'd never see, families were safer because of the work I did in shadow. Tomorrow, I would go back to work, back to the world where I was respected and valued for who I really was. But tonight, driving through the city I'd sworn to protect from people my family thought I was, I felt the weight of every lie I'd ever told and every truth I'd never been able to share. The radio crackled with police chatter, dispatchers coordinating responses to crimes in progress across the valley, domestic disturbances, traffic accidents, armed robberies, and somewhere in the mix, probably drug deals going down while real dealers counted profits and planned their next move. The work never stopped, and neither could the people who did it. I thought about my father, about the lessons he'd taught me, in the garage while we worked on engines together. Sometimes the most important work happens where people can't see it, he'd said once while we replaced the transmission in an old Chevrolet. The parts that keep everything running smooth, nobody notices them until they break down. Maybe that was what I'd become, an invisible part of a larger machine, keeping things running smooth, while nobody noticed. My family couldn't see the work because it had to remain hidden. The communities I protected couldn't thank me because they didn't know I existed. Even my colleagues at the DEA only knew pieces of who I was, fragments of a person divided between cover identities and operational security. But the work mattered. That had to be enough, because it was all I had left. In 48 hours, when my family made their call to the DEA tip line, when agents who knew exactly who I was received reports about my suspicious activities, the charade would reach its breaking point. They would learn the truth about their sister, their daughter, the woman they thought they knew but had never really understood. The question was, would that truth bring us together, or tear us apart forever? And when the moment came for them to face what they'd done, what they'd assumed, what they'd been willing to sacrifice for their own peace of mind, would they be proud of the choice they'd made, or haunted by it? Only one way to find out. The Phoenix DEA field office buzzed with its usual controlled chaos as I walked through the security checkpoint at 7:30. Agent Rodriguez looked up from his desk, concern flickering across his weathered face as I approached. The coffee in his mug had gone cold hours ago, and case files were spread across his workspace like a paper hurricane. "You look like hell, Brooks," he said, not bothering with pleasantries. Carlos had been my partner long enough to read the signs when something was eating at me. "Want to talk about that family emergency?" I settled into my chair, powering up the secure terminal that connected me to databases most people didn't know existed. "My sister thinks I'm a drug dealer," I said without looking up. "Actually, my whole family thinks I'm a drug dealer." Rodriguez paused halfway through taking a sip of his cold coffee. "Come again?" "They've been watching me, Carlos, keeping track of my schedule, monitoring who drops me off, counting the cash I carry. Last night they gave me an ultimatum: turn myself in, or they're calling the DEA tip line to report me." The absurdity of it hung in the air between us. Rodriguez set down his mug and leaned back in his chair, processing what I'd just told him. "They're going to call us to report you to us." 48 hours, I confirmed, pulling up the Morales case file on my screen. "So what's this new intelligence you mentioned?" Rodriguez studied my face for a long moment, recognizing my need to lose myself in work rather than deal with the personal crisis brewing at home. "Intercepted communications suggest Morales is moving a major shipment through Tucson next week. But here's the interesting part: he's specifically requested you for the deal." That got my attention. Victor Morales was a mid-level distributor I'd been cultivating for 6 months, slowly working my way up his organization by proving my reliability and keeping my mouth shut. In the criminal world, those were the only credentials that mattered. Trust was earned through actions, not words, and I'd spent countless hours building the reputation that kept me alive and effective. "He's bringing me deeper into the organization," I said, already understanding the implications. "This could be our chance to identify his supplier." "That's what we're thinking, but it's also dangerous as hell. Morales doesn't invite people to major deals unless he's absolutely certain about them. If there's even a whisper of suspicion, if anything feels off, he'll disappear and we'll lose 8 months of work." I thought about my family's threat, about the call they were planning to make to the very agency I worked for. If somehow that call triggered an investigation, if my cover was blown at exactly the wrong moment, it wouldn't just end my career. People would doubt the network we'd been building, the trust I'd earned, the intelligence we'd gathered. All of it would evaporate. Worse, Morales and his associates would know they'd been infiltrated, and they'd take steps to ensure it never happened again. "There's something else," Rodriguez continued, lowering his voice. "The intel suggests this isn't just a local operation. We think Morales is connected to the Hernandez cartel, the same group that Martinez compromised 3 years ago." Sarah Martinez, the agent, whose disclosure to her husband had blown an entire operation and sent targets scurrying back to Mexico. If Morales was connected to that network, if this was their attempted re-entry into American markets, then the stakes were higher than I'd imagined. This wasn't just about local dealers and street-level distribution. This was about the kind of organized criminal enterprise that could flood the Southwest with enough drugs to fuel addiction epidemics. For decades, my phone buzzed with a text message. "Amanda, of course. Have you thought about what we discussed? Time is running out." I deleted the message without responding, and turned my attention back to the case file. The photograph of Victor Morales stared back at me from the screen, a man in his 40s with graying temples and eyes that had seen too much. In our meetings, he'd been cautious but not paranoid, professional but not cold. He treated the drug trade like any other business, with calculated risks and measured rewards. That made him more dangerous than the hotheads and addicts who usually populated the lower levels of distribution network. What's the timeline on the Tucson operation?
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
I asked. 5 days. We're coordinating with local law enforcement and Border Patrol, but it's your show, Brooks. You're the only one Morales trusts. 5 days. My family's ultimatum expired in 2. If they followed through on their threat, if they actually called the DEA tip line, the timing couldn't be worse. I imagined some desk agent taking their report, maybe even recognizing my name from operational briefings. The investigation that would follow, even if it cleared me immediately, would create exactly the kind of attention that could compromise everything. Rodriguez, I said slowly, hypothetically speaking, what would happen if someone called the tip line and reported me as a suspected dealer? He raised an eyebrow. Hypothetically, depends on the credibility of the source and the specifics of the allegation. If it's just someone with a grudge making vague accusations, probably nothing. But if it's detailed information from family members with first-hand observation, he trailed off, understanding dawning in his expression. Jesus, Natalie, they could actually trigger an investigation. And if that investigation happens while I'm deep cover with Morales, it would be a disaster. Even if we manage to keep it quiet, even if we explained the situation to whoever caught the case, there would be paperwork, digital trails, records that could be subpoenaed if Morales ever got arrested, and his lawyers started fishing for evidence of law enforcement misconduct. The weight of the situation settled over me like a lid blanket. My family's righteous indignation, their determination to save me from myself, could destroy an operation that had taken months to develop. They thought they were protecting the community by reporting a drug dealer, not realizing they were sabotaging the very law enforcement efforts designed to keep communities safe. There's gotta be something we can do, Rodriguez said. Some way to head this off. Like what? Tell them the truth, break protocol and compromise operational security because my family can't mind their own business? Maybe there's a middle ground. Some way to redirect their suspicions without revealing classified information. My family's certainty about my criminal activities was based on observable patterns. Irregular schedule, unexplained cash, secretive phone calls, unfamiliar vehicles, all perfectly reasonable evidence if you didn't know the real explanation. But what if I could provide an alternative explanation? Something that accounted for their observations without revealing the truth. I could tell them I'm working private security, corporate investigations, executive protection, something that would explain the schedule and the cash without getting into specifics. Would they buy it? Probably not. Amanda's got her mind made up, and she's convinced the rest of them. Besides, it's too late for explanation. They've moved past wanting answers to wanting action. Rodriguez pulled up another file on his computer. This one containing surveillance photos from previous operations, images of drug dealers, money laundering operations, cartel safe houses. The human cost of the drug trade wasn't always visible in these sterile law enforcement photographs, but I'd seen it firsthand. The kids who aged out of foster care into addiction because dealers targeted them at their most vulnerable. The families torn apart by overdose. The communities where people were afraid to let their children play outside because of the violence that followed drug trafficking. You know what the real irony is? I said, studying one of the photos, worried about the family reputation. About what the neighbors will think if their daughter gets arrested for dealing drugs, but they have no idea that their daughter is actually making their neighborhood safer. The work we do, it's thankless by design. Rodriguez replied, the moment people know about it, it stops working. That's the price we pay for being effective. I thought about my father again. About the pride in his voice when I'd told him I'd been accepted to the DEA academy. He'd understood that some jobs required sacrifices. That protecting people sometimes meant isolating yourself from the very people you were trying to protect. But he'd also warned me about the cost of living a double life, about the way secrets could poison relationships, even when they were kept for the right reasons. My phone rang, startling me out of my thoughts. Rachel's name appeared on the caller ID. I hesitated before answering, wondering if this was another attempt at intervention, or if my youngest sister had something different to say. Nat? Her voice was small, uncertain. Can we talk? Just the two of us? I'm at work, Rachel. I know, but this is important. Please, I'm downtown anyway. I could meet you for lunch. I glanced at Rodriguez, who was pretending not to listen while clearly hanging on every word. Where? Downtown. Civic Space Park. There's a food truck that sells those sandwiches you used to like when we were kids. The specificity of the location, and the reference to childhood memories, suggested this wasn't a setup, that Rachel genuinely wanted to have a private conversation away from Amanda's influence and Mom's disappointment. Maybe she had doubts about the family's unified front, Or maybe she just wanted to hear my side of the story before they made their call to the DEA. Give me an hour, I said. Civic Space Park sat in the heart of downtown Phoenix, a green oasis surrounded by the glass and steel towers that housed the city's legal and financial districts. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was meeting my sister in the shadow of the federal courthouse where I'd testified in dozens of drug cases, sending dealers to prison while my family assumed I was one of them. Rachel was waiting by the iconic needle sculpture that dominated the park's center, wearing the kind of sundress that screamed elementary school teacher. She'd always been the family member I was closest to, the one who asked questions instead of making assumptions, who listened instead of lecturing. If anyone was going to break from the family consensus, it would be her. Thanks for coming, she said as I approached, her eyes searching my face for something I couldn't identify. I brought sandwiches. She held up a paper bag from the food truck, the smell of roasted turkey and fresh bread, making my stomach growl. I hadn't eaten since yesterday's confrontation at the diner. We found a bench in the shade, unwrapping our lunch, in comfortable silence. Around us, office workers on their lunch breaks played frisbee with their dogs, while tourists took selfies with the city skyline. It was a normal scene of urban life, the kind of peaceful moment that existed because people like me worked in the shadows to keep the darkness at bay. Amanda thinks I'm naive, Rachel said finally, taking a small bite of her sandwich. She thinks I don't understand the real world, that I'm too trusting because I work with children all day. Are you? Maybe, but I know you, Nat. I've known you my whole life, and the person they're describing, this drug dealer who doesn't care about anyone but herself, that's not who you are. I felt something crack inside my chest, a tiny fissure in the wall I'd built between my professional and personal lives. Rachel had always been able to see through my defenses, even as a child. When I'd started dating someone I wasn't sure about, she'd known before I did that it wouldn't work out. When I'd been struggling in college, she'd somehow sensed my stress, even though I'd never mentioned it to anyone. Then who am I? I asked, genuinely curious about her perspective. You're the person who used to walk me to school every day when I was scared of the older kids. You're the person who taught me how to change a tire and balance a checkbook, and stand up for myself when people tried to push me around. You're the person who called me every week during my first year of teaching to make sure I wasn't getting overwhelmed. She paused, wiping mustard from her fingers with a napkin. You're also the person who's been lying to us for years about something important, and I think I know why. My heart stopped. What do you mean? I think you're protecting us from something. I think whatever you're really doing, it's dangerous or complicated or both, and you can't tell us about it because knowing would put us at risk. The accuracy of her assessment took my breath away. Rachel had figured out more about my situation in a few hours of thinking than the rest of my family had managed in years of observation and speculation. She'd looked past the surface evidence and seen the underlying truth, even if she didn't know the specific. That's a very creative theory, I said carefully. It's not a theory, it's a pattern. When we were kids, you used to lie to mom and dad about where you were going when you thought the truth would worry them. You'd say you were going to Sarah's house when you were really going to help Jenny Morrison deal with her abusive stepfather. You'd say you were studying at the library when you were really tutoring kids who couldn't afford help. She was right. I'd always been the family member who took on other people's problems, who intervened when I saw injustice or suffering. It was probably what had drawn me to law enforcement in the first place, the desire to stand between predators and their victims on a larger scale. The others don't see it because they're looking at the wrong things, Rachel continued. They see the cash and the weird hours and they think criminal, but I see the stress, the exhaustion, the way you check your phone like you're always on call for something important. That's not how drug dealers act, Nat. That's how cops act. The word hung between us like a challenge. Rachel had connected the dots, or at least enough of them to reach a conclusion that was dangerously close to the truth. The question was what to do about it. Confirming her suspicions would violate protocol, but denying them would mean lying to the one family member who'd actually understood what was happening. Even if that were true, I said slowly, even if I were involved in law enforcement somehow, it wouldn't change the family's ultimatum. They've made up their minds. Amanda has made up her mind. Mom's just following her lead because she doesn't know what else to do, and Kevin's just afraid of being associated with scandal. Rachel turned to face me directly, but I haven't made up my mind. I want to hear the truth from you. I can't tell you the truth, because it would put me in danger, because it would put a lot of people in danger. It was the closest I'd come to confirming her suspicions, and we both knew it. Rachel nodded slowly, processing the implications of what I'd just said. If she was right about my being in law enforcement, if I was working undercover or on sensitive cases, then the family's threat to report me to federal authorities wasn't just misguided, it was potentially catastrophic. How much time do you have? She asked. Before whatever you're working on gets complicated by Amanda's phone call. I checked my watch. 29 hours until the family's ultimatum expired, 5 days until the Morales operation in Tucson. The timing was impossible. The stakes higher than my family could imagine. Not enough, I said. Rachel finished her sandwich in thoughtful silence, watching a group of children chase pigeons around the fountain. These were the people I'd sworn to protect. Families enjoying a peaceful afternoon in the park because others fought battles they'd never know about. The work mattered, even when it cost everything. What if I could buy you more time? Rachel asked suddenly. What do you mean? What if I could convince them to wait, not permanently, but long enough for you to handle whatever you're handling? How would you do that? By telling them what I think is really going on, by making them understand that their phone call might hurt more people than just you. It was tempting, the idea of having an ally within my own family, but it was also dangerous. If Rachel convinced the others to delay their ultimatum, they might start asking more questions, digging deeper, paying closer attention to my activities. The additional scrutiny could be just as damaging as an immediate investigation. Rachel, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but you need to stay out of this. Whatever happens, happens. Don't put yourself in the middle of it. I'm already in the middle of it. We all are. The question is whether we're going to help you or hurt you. She stood up, gathering the sandwich wrappers and napkins with the automatic efficiency of a teacher cleaning up after her students. I'm going to talk to them tonight, not to convince them you're innocent, because I don't think they'll believe that, but to convince them that they don't understand the situation well enough to take action. And if they don't listen, then I'll call you and give you a heads up before they make their call. At least you'll have a few hours warning. It wasn't much, but it was more than I'd had an hour ago. Rachel was offering to risk her own standing with the family to protect me from consequences she didn't fully understand. It was exactly the kind of selfless gesture that reminded me why I'd chosen a job that required protecting people like her. Thank you, I said simply. Don't thank me yet. Thank me when this is all over and you're safe. I watched her walk away across the park, her sundress bright against the green grass, and wondered if I'd just made another mistake in a long series of mistakes that had brought me to this point. Involving Rachel, even peripherally, added another variable to an already complex situation, but it also gave me something I hadn't had before. Someone who knew enough of the truth to understand the stakes. My phone buzzed with a text from Rodriguez. New development in Morales case. Need you back ASAP. I stood up, brushing sandwich crumbs from my father's leather jacket, and walked back toward the federal building where my real life waited. Whatever Rachel managed to accomplish with our family, whatever time she could buy me, I had work to do. The afternoon sun glinted off the windows of the DEA field office, as I badged back through security, returning to the world where I was valued for who I really was instead of suspected for who I pretended to be. But even there, surrounded by colleagues who understood the importance of the work, I carried the weight of my family's ultimatum like a stone in my chest. Carlos was waiting at my desk with a grim expression, and a new set of photographs spread across my workspace. Surveillance shots of Victor Morales meeting with men I didn't recognize, license plates from vehicles that weren't in our database, timestamps that suggested a level of activity we hadn't anticipated. What am I looking at? I asked. Morales isn't just moving product next week. He's moving up in the organization. These photos were taken yesterday, outside a warehouse in Tempe. The man he's talking to is Miguel Santos, and Santos doesn't meet with mid-level dealers unless they're about to become high-level dealers. Miguel Santos. I'd heard the name in briefings, but never seen his face. He was rumored to be the Hernandez cartel's primary representative in Arizona, the man who coordinated major shipments and resolved territorial disputes. If Morales was meeting with Santos, It meant our investigation had stumbled onto something much bigger than local distribution. "What's the DEA's interest in Santos?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. "He's been on our watch list for 2 years, ever since the Martinez Compromise. We think he's the one who reorganized the cartel's American operations after they went underground. If we can get close to Santos through Morales, if we can document their relationship and identify their network, we could dismantle the entire Southwest distribution system." The scope of the operation was expanding by the hour. What had started as a routine investigation into local drug dealing was becoming a chance to strike at the heart of a major cartel operation, the kind of case that could save thousands of lives and earn commendations from Washington, the kind of case that required absolute secrecy and perfect execution, the kind of case that could be destroyed by a single phone call from concerned family members to a federal tip line. I thought about Rachel's promise to buy me time, about her plan to convince our family to delay their ultimatum, even if she succeeded, even if she managed to postpone their call for a few days, it wouldn't solve the underlying problem. My family's suspicions weren't going away, and neither was their determination to take action if they didn't get the answers they wanted. "Carlos," I said, making a decision that felt both inevitable and terrifying, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly. If my cover gets blown, if this operation falls apart because of something in my personal life, how many people are going to suffer for it?" He looked at the photographs spread across my desk, at the intelligence reports documenting cartel activities, at the organizational charts showing networks that stretched from Mexico to Canada. "Thousands," he said without hesitation. "Maybe tens of thousands, depending on how much product they're moving, and how long it takes us to rebuild our intelligence network. And if I walk away now, if I request reassignment and let someone else handle Morales, it would take months to establish a new relationship, if it's even possible. Morales trusts you specifically. Another agent would have to start from scratch, and there's no guarantee he'd be willing to work with someone new." The mathematics of the situation were brutal in their simplicity. My family's misguided attempt to save me from myself could cost more lives than any drug deal I'd ever helped prevent. Their love, expressed through ultimatums and threats, could do more damage than the cartels I'd spent my career fighting. But there was another calculation to consider, one that had nothing to do with operational success or public safety. My family was going to hate me when they learned the truth. They were going to realize that they'd spent months planning to betray their own daughter to federal agents, that they'd been willing to destroy my life to protect their reputation. The guilt and embarrassment of that realization would poison our relationships permanently. Unless I found a way to help them understand before it was too late, unless I could show them who I really was, and why the secrecy had been necessary, unless I could turn their misguided love into something that actually helped, instead of hurt. "I have an idea," I told Rodriguez, "but you're not going to like it." Rodriguez stared at me across the cluttered desk, his expression cycling through confusion, disbelief, and what might have been admiration. "You want to do what?" "Controlled disclosure," I repeated, keeping my voice steady despite the magnitude of what I was proposing. "We bring my family into the operation, under strict parameters, limited information, signed confidential agreements, supervised contact." "Brooks, that's not controlled disclosure. That's career suicide with extra paperwork." I pulled up the operational guidelines on my computer, scrolling through sections I'd memorized years ago but had never thought I'd need to invoke. Section allows for civilian involvement in ongoing investigations, when their actions could compromise operational security. My family is planning to report me to federal authorities in less than 28 hours. It qualifies for a lot of things, but bringing civilians into an active cartel investigation isn't one of them. Carlos had a point, and we both knew it. The protocols for civilian involvement were designed for situations like confidential informants or protected witnesses, not for agents whose families had become unwitting threats to national security. But the regulations were also written broadly enough to allow for unusual circumstances, and my situation definitely qualified as unusual. "What's the alternative?" I asked. "Let them make their call, and hope whoever catches the case
understands the sensitivity of the timing. Hope the investigation stays quiet enough that Morales doesn't get spooked.
Hope we can contain the damage when everything falls apart. Rodriguez rubbed his temples, a gesture I'd seen him make countless times when dealing with bureaucratic nightmares and impossible situations. Even if the supervisors approved it, which they won't, what makes you think your family would agree to keep quiet? They're convinced you're a criminal. Learning you're a federal agent might not be enough to change their minds about calling authorities. Because they're not trying to hurt me, I said, though the words felt hollow even as I spoke them. They think they're saving me. If they understood what was really at stake, if they saw the bigger picture, they'd want to help. Would they? Your sister seemed pretty determined last night. That was the question that had been eating at me since my lunch with Rachel. Amanda's righteousness wasn't just about protecting the family reputation or saving me from myself. It was about control. About being the one who made decisions and solved problems for everyone else. Learning that I'd been lying to her for 8 years, that I'd had a successful career she knew nothing about, might make her more determined to take action, not less. But Rachel had seen through the deception to understand the underlying truth. If she could convince the others to listen, if she could buy me enough time to present my case properly, maybe there was a chance. My phone buzzed with a text message. Rachel again. Family meeting tonight at 8. Mom's house. They want answers. I showed the message to Rodriguez, who shook his head slowly. This is getting worse by the hour, or better, if they're asking for answers instead of just making demands. Maybe there's room for negotiation. And if there isn't, if you walk into that meeting and they still want to turn you in. I thought about the photographs spread across my desk, about Victor Morales and Miguel Santos and the network they represented. Somewhere in Mexico, chemists were cooking synthetic drugs that would flood American cities within weeks. Somewhere in Arizona, distributors were planning routes that would carry poison into schools and neighborhoods. Somewhere in the shadows, people like me were fighting a war most citizens didn't know existed. Then I stopped them. I said simply. Rodriguez leaned back in his chair, studying my face with the intensity he usually reserved for surveillance targets. By showing them exactly what they're threatening to destroy. The idea had been forming in my mind since lunch with Rachel, crystallizing into something that felt both desperate and inevitable. My family's ignorance wasn't malicious, it was just ignorant. They'd drawn conclusions based on incomplete information, made decisions without understanding the consequences. If I could educate them, if I could show them the real stakes, maybe their love would override their fear. You're talking about bringing civilians to an active crime scene, Rodriguez said. You're talking about exposing ongoing investigations to people with no security clearance and no training in operational security. I'm talking about saving lives, theirs and everyone else's, by risking everything we've worked for. It was a fair criticism, and one I couldn't dismiss. The operation to infiltrate Morales's network represented months of careful planning and relationship building. The intelligence we'd gathered could lead to arrests that would save thousands of lives. The connections we'd identified could help dismantle trafficking routes that stretched across multiple states. All of that would be lost if my family's intervention forced me to abandon my cover. But there was another calculation to consider. If I let them make their call, if I allowed the investigation to proceed and destroy the operation anyway, those same lives would be lost, and we'd have nothing to show for it. At least, this way, there was a chance. I need to make a call, I said, reaching for the secure phone that connected directly to our supervisor's office. Rooks. Wait. Rodriguez caught my arm before I could dial. Are you sure about this? Once you start this process, there's no going back. Even if it works, even if your family keeps quiet and the operation succeeds, your career is going to take a hit. Supervisors don't forget agents who require special accommodations. My career won't matter if the operation fails, because of something I could have prevented. He nodded slowly, understanding the logic even if he didn't like it. What do you need from me? Background checks on my family members, full workups, criminal history, financial records, social media analysis. If I'm going to recommend them for any level of clearance, even temporary, we need to know everything. That's going to take hours. We have hours. The meeting isn't until 8 to 9. Rodriguez pulled up the necessary forms on his computer, fingers flying across the keyboard, as he initiated background investigations that would normally take days or weeks to complete. The DEA's resources were considerable when properly motivated, and the potential compromise of an ongoing cartel investigation was definitely proper motivation. While he worked, I placed the call to Supervisor Williams, a 20-year veteran who'd seen every kind of operational crisis the job could produce. His assistant put me through immediately, which meant Rodriguez had already given him a heads up about the situation. Agent Brooks. Williams's gravelly voice filled the secure line. I understand you have a family problem that's becoming an operational problem. Yes, I'm requesting permission to initiate controlled disclosure protocols with 4 civilian family members who pose an immediate threat to ongoing investigations. Explain immediate threat. I outlined the situation systematically, laying out the timeline, the stakes, and the potential consequences of both action and inaction. Williams listened without interruption, occasionally making notes that I could hear scratching across paper on his end of the line. This is highly irregular, Brooks. Yes, sir, but so is the situation. Have you considered requesting emergency reassignment? We could pull you from the Morales operation and let someone else handle the relationship. Agent Rodriguez and I discussed that option. Morales specifically requested me for the Tucson operation. Bringing in a new agent would require months of relationship building, and there's no guarantee of success. And you believe your family members can be trusted with classified information. I believe they can be educated about the consequences of their current course of action. Williams was quiet for a long moment, probably weighing the risks and benefits of an unprecedented situation. Somewhere in the background, I could hear the muffled sounds of the federal building's evening shift change. Agents ending their shifts, and others beginning the night watch that kept the city safe while most people slept. I'm going to need documentation, he said finally. Complete background reports on all family members, psychological profiles, assessment of security risks. I'm also going to need a detailed operational plan for how you intend to conduct this disclosure without compromising other investigations. Rodriguez is working on the background checks now. I can have the operational plan on your desk within 2 hours. Make it 90 minutes. And Brooks, this better work. If your family members become a security risk, if they leak information or compromise ongoing operations, it's going to be your career and possibly your freedom on the line. Understood, sir. The line went dead, leaving me staring at a phone that had just committed me to a course of action that could either save everything or destroy it completely. Rodriguez looked up from his computer, eyebrows raised in question. Conditional approval, I said, pending background checks and an operational plan. What kind of operational plan? I pulled out a legal pad and started sketching the framework for something that had never been attempted before. Limited disclosure of my professional identity and current assignment. No specific operational details, no names of targets or informants, no classified intelligence, just enough information to help them understand why their call would be catastrophic, and if they demand more detail, then we provide more details, under controlled circumstances with signed agreements and legal consequences for disclosure. It sounded reasonable when I said it out loud, but the reality was more complicated. My family wasn't just curious about my job, they were convinced I was a criminal. Showing them my badge might not be enough to overcome years of suspicion and months of mounting evidence. They might demand proof, documentation, verification from outside sources. Each additional layer of disclosure increased the security risk exponentially, but the alternative was certain disaster. In less than 24 hours, Amanda would place a call that would trigger an investigation into my activity. Even if that investigation was resolved quickly, even if my supervisors managed to contain the damage, the disruption would be enough to compromise the Morales operation. Miguel Santos would disappear back into the shadows, the Hernandez cartel would adapt their methods, and thousands of potential victims would pay the price for my family's good intentions. Rodriguez's computer chimed with incoming data. Initial background checks are complete, he said, scanning the results. Your family's clean, no criminal history, no financial irregularities, no concerning associations. Your mother's credit report shows some late payments after your father's death, but nothing that suggests criminal activity. Amanda works for a law firm that handles corporate litigation, mostly insurance disputes. Rachel's been teaching elementary school for 6 years, no disciplinary actions, stellar evaluations. Kevin's an insurance adjuster with no flags in any database. What about social media? Conservative but not extreme. Amanda posts mostly about work achievements and family events. Rachel shares classroom photos and education articles. Your mother's barely active, just birthday wishes and vacation photos. Kevin posts about sports and home improvement projects. No political extremism, no conspiracy theories, no associations with criminal organizations. It was about what I'd expect. My family was aggressively normal, the kind of middle-class Americans who followed rules and trusted institutions, and believed that the system worked the way it was supposed to work. Their decision to report me to federal authorities wasn't born from anti-government sentiment or criminal sympathy. It was born from genuine belief that law enforcement would handle the situation appropriately, which made the irony even more devastating. They trusted the DEA enough to report their own family member, but they didn't trust me enough to believe I might be working for the agency they were calling. What about the operational plan? Rodriguez asked. I looked at the legal pad where I'd been sketching ideas, trying to find a framework that would satisfy both security requirements and family expectations. Staged disclosure, I said, thinking out loud. First, we show them basic credentials and explain the general nature of undercover work. If they're willing to listen, we provide more specific information about current operations and why timing is critical. And if they're not willing to listen, then we escalate. Full disclosure of the Morales investigation, complete briefing on cartel activities, maybe even surveillance footage to show them what we're really dealing with. That's a lot of classified information to share with civilians. It's a lot of lives to lose if we don't. Rodriguez nodded grimly, understanding the calculation even if he didn't like it. What do you need me to do? Help me write the operational plan, and be ready to provide backup if the meeting goes sideways. Backup how? If my family decides to make their call tonight instead of waiting until tomorrow, if they refuse to listen or demand more proof than I can provide, we might need to take more direct action. What kind of direct action? I thought about Amanda's self-righteousness, about her determination to save me from myself regardless of the consequences. She'd made it clear that she was willing to sacrifice our relationship to protect the family reputation. If she maintained that position even after learning the truth, if she insisted on making her call despite understanding the stakes, then the family dynamics would become an operational security issue, the kind that keeps ongoing investigations from being compromised. I said. Rodriguez understood what I wasn't saying directly. If my family became a security threat, if they insisted on actions that would compromise ongoing operations, they would need to be contained until the threat passed. Not arrested, not charged, but prevented from taking actions that could cost lives. How long until the Tucson operation concludes? He asked. 5 days, for the primary operation. Maybe another week for follow-up arrests and intelligence gathering. 2 weeks maximum before Morales is either in custody or knows he's been compromised. Think your family can keep quiet for 2 weeks? I think they'll have to. The words sounded more confident than I felt. Amanda had spent months building her case against me, gathering evidence and developing theories about my criminal activities. Learning that those theories were wrong wouldn't automatically make her cooperative, especially if she felt embarrassed or manipulated by the revelation. But Rachel had demonstrated the capacity to see past surface appearances to underlying truth. If I could convince her first, if she could help me present the information to the others, maybe there was a chance for understanding instead of confrontation. My phone rang again. Rachel's number, probably calling to provide more details about the evening meeting or to warn me about the family's mood. I answered on the second ring. Nat, we have a problem, she said without preamble.
Amanda hired a private investigator. The words hit like a physical blow. What? She paid someone to follow you, to take pictures, to document your activities. She's been building a case file for weeks. Jesus, what did they find? I don't know. She won't show me everything, but she's got photos of you meeting with people, going to different locations, carrying bags and packages. She's convinced it's all evidence of drug dealing. Photos of me meeting with informants, visiting crime scenes, carrying evidence bags and surveillance equipment. To a private investigator with no knowledge of law enforcement operations, it would indeed look like criminal activity. To my family, it would be confirmation of everything they'd suspected. There's more, Rachel continued. The investigator traced some of the license plates from cars that dropped you off. They're registered to companies that don't seem to exist, shell corporations with no real business addresses, DEA cover companies, designed to provide legitimate paperwork for undercover vehicles without revealing their true ownership. Another piece of evidence that supported my family's theory while actually disproving it. How much of this have they shared with each other? Amanda presented everything to Mom and Kevin this afternoon. That's why they called the meeting for tonight. They're not asking for answers, Nat. They're presenting their evidence and demanding that you confess. The situation had escalated beyond anything I'd anticipated. My family wasn't just suspicious, they'd conducted their own investigation and gathered what they believed was conclusive proof of my criminal activities. The meeting tonight wasn't an opportunity for explanation, it was a trial where the verdict had already been decided. Rachel, listen to me carefully. Do not go to that meeting tonight. What? Why? Because it's not safe, not for you, not for any of us. Nat, you're scaring me. What's really going on? I looked at Rodriguez, who was listening to my side of the conversation with growing alarm. The operational plan we'd been developing was based on the assumption that I could control the flow of information, that I could present my case in a measured way that would convince my family to cooperate. But if they'd already made up their minds, if they'd gathered evidence that they believed supported their position, then controlled disclosure might not be enough. I can't explain over the phone, I said to Rachel, but I need you to trust. Whatever Amanda thinks she's discovered, whatever evidence she believes she has, she's wrong, and if the family proceeds with their plan tomorrow, people are going to get hurt. What people? Innocent people. People who are depending on me to do my job. Your job, Nat. What is your job? I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of 8 years of lies and half-truths pressing down on me like a physical force. Rachel deserved the truth, but the truth was classified at levels that could cost careers and lives if mishandled. I'll explain everything tonight, I said, but not at Mom's house, not with Amanda and her evidence file. Meet me somewhere private, somewhere we can talk without being overheard or recorded. You think they're recording conversation? I think they're treating this like a criminal investigation, which means they're probably documenting everything for evidence. Rachel was quiet for a moment, processing the implications. Where do you want to meet? Desert Ridge, Marketplace, the Barnes & Noble, second floor, in the philosophy section, 8:30. What about the family meeting? Tell them I'll be there at 9. That should give us enough time to talk first, and if they won't wait, then we'll deal with that when it happens. I ended the call and looked at Rodriguez, who was already pulling up maps and contact lists on his computer. Change of plans, I said. We're going to need a full tactical support team for a family meeting. For a family meeting where emotions are running high, evidence files are being presented, and private investigators have been documenting federal law enforcement activities without knowing it. Rodriguez understood immediately. If my family had hired professionals to investigate me, if those professionals had photographed me during undercover operations, or identified DEA assets, then the security breach was much more serious than a family dispute. It was a potential compromise of ongoing investigations and active personnel. How do you want to handle it? Full containment protocol, surveillance on all family members, monitoring of communications, intervention authority. If they attempt to contact outside agents, that's a big escalation, Brooks. It's a big problem, and it's about to get bigger. I thought about the photos Rachel had described, about private investigators documenting activities they didn't understand, how many operations had been captured on film, How many agents had been photographed without their knowledge? How many criminal targets had access to the same private investigation firms that my family had hired? The situation had moved beyond personal crisis into national security territory. My family's investigation hadn't just threatened my cover, it had potentially compromised the entire Phoenix DEA field office. Every case I'd worked, every agent I'd collaborated with, every operation I'd participated in, was now at risk. Rodriguez, I said, reaching for the secure phone again, we're going to need a lot more help. The philosophy section of Barnes & Noble was mercifully empty at 8:30 on a Thursday evening, rows of books on ethics and moral reasoning providing an ironic backdrop for the conversation I was about to have. Rachel arrived precisely on time, clutching a coffee cup like a lifeline, and glancing nervously over her shoulder as if she expected Amanda to materialize from behind the self-help section. "You look terrible," she said, settling into one of the oversized chairs, tucked between shelves of Aristotle and Kant. I probably did. The last 6 hours had been a whirlwind of secure phone calls, emergency briefings, and tactical planning that would have been unthinkable that morning.
Rodriguez and his team were positioned throughout the shopping center, maintaining surveillance while trying to look like ordinary customers. 3 vehicles sat in the parking lot with agents monitoring communications and ready to respond if the situation deteriorated. The private investigator Amanda had hired was under discreet observation at his office downtown, his phone calls and computer activities being monitored in real time. "Rachel, what I'm about to tell you is classified at the highest levels of government. Before I say anything else, I need you to understand that repeating this information to anyone could result in serious criminal charges." Her eyes widened, coffee cup frozen halfway to her lips. "Criminal charge, federal prison, loss of security clearance, lifetime ban from government employment. This isn't a family secret, it's national security." I pulled out my credentials, leather wallet containing my badge, and identification that I'd carried for 8 years, but never shown to anyone in my personal life. The weight of it felt different tonight, heavier somehow, as if the gravity of revelation had increased its physical mass. Rachel stared at the badge for a long moment, reading the words Drug Enforcement Administration several times before looking up at my face. "You're a federal agent, Special Agent Natalie Brooks, assigned to the Phoenix field office. I've been undercover for the past 6 months, infiltrating a drug trafficking organization with connections to Mexican cartels. The people Amanda hired to follow you, they were photographing federal law enforcement operations. Without knowing it, yet, which means those photographs and surveillance reports are now classified documents that have been shared with civilians without proper clearance." Rachel set down her coffee cup with shaking hands. "Oh my God, Amanda doesn't know, does she? She thinks she's gathered evidence against a drug dealer, but she's actually interfered with a federal investigation. It gets worse. The operation I'm working on is scheduled to conclude in 5 days. If your family makes their call to the DEA tip line tomorrow, if they trigger an investigation into my activities, it could compromise months of work and put lives at risk." What kind of law? I thought about Victor Morales and his meeting with Miguel Santos, about the warehouse full of narcotics that would flood the streets if we failed to intercept it. The kind that depend on stopping drugs from reaching schools and neighborhoods. The kind that trust federal agents to do our jobs without interference from well-meaning family members. Rachel leaned back in her chair, processing the magnitude of what I'd just revealed. Around us, the bookstore's evening customers browsed quietly, unaware that they were witnessing a conversation that could determine the fate of a major federal investigation. "Why couldn't you tell us?" she asked finally. "Why did you have to let us believe you were a criminal?" "Because undercover work requires absolute secrecy. The people I investigate have resources, connections, and long memories. If they discovered I was a federal agent, if they learned about my family and where you live and work, you'd all become targets. But we're targets now anyway, aren't we? Because Amanda hired investigators who documented your activities?" That was the question that had been keeping me awake for the past several hours. The private investigation had created exactly the kind of security breach that my original secrecy had been designed to prevent. By trying to protect my family through deception,
I'd inadvertently put them in the position where their actions could expose us all to danger. We're managing the situation, I said, which was true but incomplete. The important thing now is making sure no additional information gets disclosed. You mean making sure Amanda doesn't make her phone call? I mean making sure your family understands the real consequences of their intended actions. Rachel nodded slowly, but I could see doubt flickering in her expression. What if they don't? What if Amanda's so angry about being lied to that she decides to make the call anyway? It was a valid concern, one that had prompted the tactical support team, currently positioned throughout the shopping center. Amanda's personality profile suggested someone who didn't handle being wrong gracefully, who might double down on her position rather than admit she'd made a mistake. Learning that her months of investigation had been misguided could trigger exactly the kind of emotional response that led to poor decision-making. Then we'll have to take steps to prevent that, I said carefully. What kind of steps? I thought about the containment protocols that had been activated, about the legal authorities that allowed federal agents to detain civilians who posed threats to ongoing operations, the kind that keep people safe while investigations conclude. Rachel studied my face, probably recognizing that I wasn't providing complete answers. Nate, are you saying you'd have Amanda arrested to protect your investigation? I'm saying that compromising federal investigations is a crime, and crimes have consequences. It sounded cold when I said it out loud, but the mathematics were simple. Amanda's desire for family intervention had already created a security breach that could cost lives. If she insisted on escalating that breach despite understanding the stakes, then she would be choosing to prioritize her own emotions over public safety. At that point, she would cease being a concerned family member and become a threat to national security. How long do we have before the meeting at Mom's house? I asked. Rachel checked her phone. 20 minutes. But Nat, I don't think this is going to go the way you hope. Amanda's convinced she's saving you from yourself. Kevin's worried about the family reputation. Mom's just scared and confused. They're not in a frame of mind to listen to reason. Then I'll have to change their frame of mind. I stood up, slipping my credentials back into my jacket pocket, and mentally reviewing the briefing materials. Rodriguez had prepared for this moment. Photographs of cartel operations, statistics on drug-related deaths, intelligence reports detailing the scope of the Hernandez organization's activities, evidence designed to show my family exactly what they were threatening to disrupt. Rachel, I need you to do something for me. What? When we get to Mom's house, when Amanda starts presenting her evidence, I need you to support what I'm about to tell them. Not because you understand all the details, but because you trust me. I do trust you, but what are you going to tell them? The truth, all of it. We walked through the bookstore in silence, past sections on mystery and romance and science fiction, genres that seemed quaint compared to the reality we were facing. The automatic doors opened onto a parking lot where ordinary people were ending ordinary evenings, loading shopping bags into cars and heading home to families who trusted each other and told each other the truth. Rodriguez's voice crackled through my earpiece as we reached my car. Brooks, we've got movement at your mother's residence. 3 vehicles in the driveway, lights on throughout the house. Looks like they're waiting for you. Any sign of the private investigator? Negative. He's still at his office, but he's been making phone calls. We're monitoring his communications. What kind of phone calls? Unknown. The calls are going to a number we haven't identified yet, possibly out of state. Could be routine business, could be something else. That was concerning. If the private investigator had connections beyond my family, if he'd shared information with other clients or colleagues, then the security breach could be wider than we'd initially assessed. Professional investigators often worked multiple cases simultaneously, shared resources and information, maintained networks that stretched across industries and jurisdictions. Keep monitoring, I said, and be ready to move if the situation deteriorates. Rachel and I drove separately to Mom's house, a modest ranch-style home in a quiet Scottsdale neighborhood, where the biggest crime was usually teenagers skateboarding past the no skateboarding sign. The familiar driveway held Amanda's Mercedes, Kevin's sensible sedan, and Mom's aging Honda, a lineup that represented different approaches to middle-class respectability, but shared commitment to conventional values. The front door opened before I could knock. Amanda stood there in business attire despite the evening hour, her expression combining righteous determination with barely concealed anger. Behind her, Kevin hovered nervously while Mom sat at the dining room table with papers spread in front of her like evidence in a trial. "You're late," Amanda said without preamble. "Traffic," I replied, stepping inside with Rachel close behind me. The dining room had been arranged like a conference room, with chairs positioned to face a presentation area where Amanda had set up a laptop and document folder. A digital projector cast an image onto the wall, a photograph of me talking to Victor Morales outside a restaurant 3 weeks ago. To my family, it looked like a drug deal. To me, it was a carefully orchestrated meeting designed to build trust within a criminal organization. "Sit down," Amanda commanded, gesturing to the chairs arranged for what was clearly meant to be an intervention rather than a discussion. I remained standing. "Before you begin your presentation, I have something to show you." "No," Amanda said firmly. "We've listened to your lies for years. Tonight, you're going to listen to the truth." She clicked to the next slide, another photograph of me entering a warehouse district building that housed a DEA safe house. The image was clear enough to show my face, the timestamp indicating it had been taken during a debriefing session following a successful bust. "This is where you've been conducting your business," Amanda announced. "A known drug distribution area where multiple arrests have been made in the past 6 months." The irony was staggering. The arrests she was referencing had been made by me and my team, operations I'd participated in as a federal agent, but to her they were evidence that I was operating in criminal territory rather than cleaning it up. "Amanda," I said quietly, "you need to stop this presentation." "I will not stop." "Kevin, show her the financial analysis." Kevin reluctantly pulled out a folder containing what appeared to be months of surveillance data, bank deposits, cash transactions, unexplained income streams that would indeed look suspicious to someone without knowledge of federal evidence procedures and operational expenses. "You've been depositing large amounts of cash on irregular schedules," he said, reading from prepared notes. "The amounts don't correspond to any legitimate employment pattern, and the timing suggests you're being paid for completed transactions rather than regular salary." DEA agents often handled evidence money, turned in cash seized during operations, received reimbursements for undercover expenses. The financial patterns Kevin had identified were exactly what you'd expect from someone working drug cases, but they were also exactly what you'd expect from someone dealing drugs. "The private investigator was very thorough," Amanda continued, advancing to a slide showing a detailed timeline of my movements over the past month. "He documented your meetings with known criminals, your visits to locations associated with drug activity, your possession of materials that appeared to be narcotics." Each item on her list had an innocent explanation that I couldn't provide without compromising ongoing operations. The known criminals were informants and targets. The locations associated with drug activity were crime scenes and surveillance points. The materials that appeared to be narcotics were evidence samples and testing kits. Mom finally spoke from her position at the table.
"Natalie, we know this is hard to hear, but we have proof,
Pictures, financial records, witness statements. You can't lie your way out of this." "I'm not lying," I said, reaching into my jacket for my credentials, "and I'm not a drug dealer." Amanda stepped forward as if to physically prevent me from speaking. "We've heard enough of your excuses. Tomorrow morning, we're calling the DEA tip line and reporting everything we've discovered. If you won't get help voluntarily, then the federal government will force you to get help." "Amanda, stop talking and listen to me." "No, we're done listening to you." I pulled out my badge and identification, holding them up where everyone could see the federal seal and official credentials. "Special Agent Natalie Brooks, Drug Enforcement Administration, badge number 7429. The silence that followed was complete. Amanda stared at the badge as if it might be an elaborate fake. Kevin's mouth opened and closed without sound. Mom's face went pale, her hands gripping the edge of the table. Rachel positioned herself where she could watch everyone's reactions, probably remembering my request for support. "That's impossible," Amanda whispered. "It's completely possible. I've been a federal agent for 8 years. assigned to undercover operations targeting drug trafficking organizations. The people you hired to investigate me have been photographing federal law enforcement activities. No, Amanda said, her voice rising. No, this is just another lie. You probably bought that badge online or stole it from somewhere. I pulled out my phone and called Rodriguez's direct line, putting it on speaker so everyone could hear. He answered immediately. Agent Rodriguez, DEA Phoenix Field Office. Carlos. It's Brooks. I'm with my family and I need you to confirm my identity and current assignment. Special Agent Natalie Brooks, badge number 7429, currently assigned to Operation Desert Storm, investigating the Morales trafficking organization with connections to the Hernandez cartel. Amanda sank into a chair, the color draining from her face. This can't be real. It's real, I said, and your investigation has compromised federal operations that could save thousands of lives. Kevin found his voice first, the private investigator, the photographs he took. Are we in trouble? That depends on what happens next. The information you've gathered is now classified at the highest levels of government. Sharing it with anyone else would be a federal crime, but we were trying to help, Mom said, tears beginning to form in her eyes. We thought you were in trouble. I know what you thought, but now you know the truth, and you have to decide what you're going to do with it. Amanda stood up abruptly, pacing to the window and back. 8 years. You've been lying to us for 8 years. I've been protecting you for 8 years. Do you have any idea what would happen if the people I investigate learned about my family? Do you know what cartels do to the families of federal agents? So you let us think you were a criminal instead. I let you think whatever you needed to think to stay safe. Rachel stepped forward, finally speaking up. Amanda, she was protecting us. Everything she did, all the secrecy, it was to keep us out of danger. Protecting us. Amanda's voice was getting louder, more emotional. She let us plan to turn her in to federal authority. She was going to let us make fools of ourselves. She was going to let you do what you thought was right. Rachel countered, even if it cost her everything. The family dynamics were fracturing in real time, years of resentment and misunderstanding bubbling to the surface. Amanda's anger wasn't just about being deceived, it was about being wrong, about having her judgment questioned, about losing the moral authority she'd claimed in family disputes. What happens now? Kevin asked, ever the practical one. What do we do with this information? You keep it secret, I said simply. You tell no one. You share no details. You pretend this conversation never happened. In 5 days, my current operation will conclude, and I'll be reassigned to a different case. Until then, you act normal and you stay quiet. And if we don't? Amanda asked, her tone suggesting she was still considering rebellion. I thought about the tactical team positioned outside, about the legal authorities that could be invoked to protect ongoing investigation. Then you'll discover that interfering with federal operations has serious consequences. Are you threatening us? I'm explaining reality. The work I do is classified for reasons that go beyond my personal safety. If you compromise ongoing investigations, if your actions lead to the escape of criminal targets, or the deaths of innocent people, you'll be held accountable. Mom spoke up from the table, her voice small and uncertain. What can we do to help? Nothing. Stay out of it completely. Don't ask questions. Don't demand updates. Don't try to research my activities or monitor my schedule. Pretend you never learned any of this. That's impossible, Amanda said. How are we supposed to pretend our sister isn't a federal agent? The same way you pretended I was a drug dealer. You made assumptions based on incomplete information, and convinced yourselves you understood the situation. Now you know the truth, but the requirements haven't changed. You still can't share what you know. The room fell quiet except for the ticking of Mom's grandfather clock, and the distant sound of traffic on the main street. Outside, Rodriguez and his team waited for signals that the situation was under control or spiraling towards something that would require intervention. Rachel moved to stand beside me, a gesture of support that wasn't lost on anyone in the room. I think we all need time to process this, she said diplomatically. Process it quickly, I replied, because in 5 days, when my operation concludes, we're all going to have to decide what kind of family we want to be going forward. Amanda looked up from where she'd been staring at her hands. What do you mean? I mean that 8 years of lies have consequences. You've spent months planning to betray me to federal authorities. I've spent years protecting you from information you couldn't handle. Neither of those patterns is sustainable. So what are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that when this is over, when the immediate security concerns have passed, we're going to have to rebuild our relationships from scratch, and that might not be possible. The words hung in the air like a death sentence for whatever remained of our family bond. Mom started crying quietly, probably realizing that her family was fragmenting in ways that couldn't be easily repaired. Kevin looked uncomfortable, caught between loyalty to his wife and recognition that she'd made serious mistakes. Rachel maintained her position beside me, but I could see the pain in her eyes as she watched our family disintegrate. I need to go, I said, heading toward the door. My operation continues in the morning, and I have work to do. Wait, Amanda called out. This isn't over. We can't just pretend nothing happened. Yes, you can. In fact, you have to, because anything else puts lives at risk. I walked out of the house where I'd grown up, leaving behind a family that would never be the same. Rachel followed me to my car, her face reflecting the weight of everything that had just been revealed. Are you okay? She asked. I will be when this operation is finished, and the bad guys are in prison. And after that, I thought about Amanda's anger, about Mom's tears, about the photographs and financial records that documented 8 years of necessary deception. After that, we'll see what's left to salvage.
As I drove away from the house, Rodriguez's voice crackled through my earpiece. Brooks, how did it go? They know the truth. Whether they can handle it remains to be seen. Any immediate security concerns? Monitor their communications for the next 24 hours. If any of them attempt to contact outside parties or share information, we'll need to intervene. Copy that. And Brooks? Yeah. For what it's worth, I think you did the right thing. I wasn't sure there had been a right thing to do in this situation. Only a series of choices between different kinds of damage. But the operation was still intact, my cover remained secure, and my family finally understood why I'd kept them in the dark. Whether that understanding would lead to forgiveness or deeper resentment was a question for another day. Tomorrow, I had drugs to intercept and criminals to arrest. The rest would have to wait. The Tucson warehouse stood silhouetted against the pre-dawn sky like a monument to everything my family couldn't understand about my world. 4 days had passed since the revelation at Mom's house. 4 days of radio silence from Amanda and Kevin, sporadic texts from Rachel checking on my well-being, and complete focus on the operation that would either vindicate 8 years of sacrifice or render it meaningless. Victor Morales arrived precisely at 6 in the morning, his black SUV pulling into the designated spot beside the loading dock. Miguel Santos emerged from a second vehicle, flanked by 2 men whose body language screamed professional security. This was the moment we'd been building toward for months, the convergence of trust and betrayal that defined undercover work. Through my earpiece, Rodriguez's voice provided steady updates from the surveillance van positioned 3 blocks away, target vehicles in position, local law enforcement standing by. You're clear to proceed, Brooks. I stepped out of my own vehicle wearing the leather jacket that had become my armor in both worlds, personal and professional. The weight of my father's memories settled around my shoulders as I walked toward men who would kill me without hesitation if they suspected the truth about who I really was. Natalia, Morales called out, using the alias I'd cultivated for 6 months. Right on time. Santos, this is the woman I told you about. Miguel Santos studied me with the calculating gaze of someone who'd survived decades in a business where trust was measured in kilograms, and betrayal was punished with bullets. He was older than his photograph suggested, gray threading through black hair, lines around his eyes that spoke of decisions no civilian would ever have to make. Morales speaks highly of your reliability, Santos said, his accent carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. But reliability in small matters doesn't guarantee reliability in large ones. I'm here, aren't I? Replied, projecting the casual confidence that had kept me alive through dozens of similar encounters. What kind of guarantee are you looking for? Santos smiled, expression that held no warmth. The kind that proves you understand the consequences of disappointment. One of his security men opened the warehouse door, revealing the reason for this dawn meeting: pallets stacked with packages wrapped in industrial plastic. Enough narcotics to fuel addiction epidemics across 3 states. The street value exceeded anything I'd seen in previous operations, representing months of chemical production and distribution planning. Impressive inventory, I said, walking among the stacks while mentally cataloging everything for the tactical team's reference. What's the timeline for movement? That depends on your capacity, Santos replied. We're restructuring our distribution network, consolidating operations under fewer, more trusted partners. This represents your audition for expanded responsibility. The words carried implications that went beyond simple drug dealing. Santos was offering to bring me deeper into the organization, to make me a key player in operations that stretched from Mexican laboratories to American street corners. It was exactly the opportunity the DEA had been hoping for, the chance to document the entire network from inside. It was also the moment when my family's interference could destroy everything. My phone buzzed with a text message. Amanda's name appeared on the screen, the first communication I'd received from her since the confrontation 4 days ago. We need to talk. Emergency. I deleted the message without reading further, focusing on Santos as he outlined distribution routes and payment schedules. But the intrusion of my personal life into this moment felt like an omen, a reminder that the 2 worlds I'd tried to keep separate were still threatening to collide. You seem distracted, Santos observed. Just thinking about logistics, I lied smoothly. This is a significant operation. I want to make sure I understand all the moving parts. Santos nodded approvingly. Attention to detail separates professionals from amateurs. Morales. Show her the transportation arrangement. As Morales led me toward another section of the warehouse, Rodriguez's voice crackled through my earpiece. Brooks, we've got a problem. Your sister just showed up at the DEA field office. My blood went cold, but I maintained my expression of professional interest as Morales explained vehicle rotations and delivery schedules. Amanda had somehow located the federal building and was presumably inside, demanding to speak with someone about her sister's activities. Even if she'd kept the revelation about my true identity secret, even if she was just seeking confirmation of what she'd learned, her presence at DEA headquarters while I was in the field created exactly the kind of connection that could compromise everything. What's she doing there? I subvocalized, barely moving my lips as I pretended to examine shipping manifests. Unknown, she asked to speak with someone about an ongoing investigation. The front desk is stalling, but she's insistent. Santos was watching me again, his attention focused on micro-expressions and behavioral tells that could reveal deception. Drug dealers developed survival instincts that rivaled those of federal agents, the ability to sense when something wasn't quite right in their environment. Is there a problem? He asked directly. No problem, just calculating numbers in my head. But there was a problem, and it was getting worse by the minute. If Amanda was at the DEA office, if she was asking questions about ongoing investigations, if someone connected her inquiries to my current operation, the security breach could be catastrophic. Santos and his organization had survived for decades by being paranoid about law enforcement infiltration. Any hint that I was connected to federal authorities would end with my death and the escape of everyone involved. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Rachel. Nat, Amanda's lost it. She's demanding that the DEA prove you're really an agent. She thinks you showed us fake credentials. The situation was deteriorating faster than I could process. Amanda's skepticism about my revelation had apparently evolved into active investigation, the same determination to uncover truth that had led her to hire private investigators was now driving her to seek verification from federal authorities. She didn't understand that her presence at DEA headquarters while I was undercover created connections that could be traced by criminal organizations with their own intelligence networks. Natalia, Santos said, his tone carrying a note of impatience. We need to finalize arrangements. My schedule doesn't accommodate delays. Of course. What do you need from me? Confirmation that you can handle the distribution volumes we're discussing. This isn't street-level dealing, it's infrastructure management. The people we work with understand that mistakes have permanent consequences. The threat was delivered with casual precision, a reminder that Santos didn't just sell drugs,
He enforced discipline within his organization. If I disappointed him, if the operation failed or attracted law enforcement attention, I wouldn't just lose my cover, I'd lose my life. Rodriguez's voice provided another update through the earpiece. Amanda's been transferred to Agent William. He's trying to manage the situation without confirming or denying anything. But she's not backing down. Supervisor Williams was skilled at handling security crises, but he wasn't trained for family intervention. Amanda's legal background would make her persistent and precise in her questioning, difficult to deflect with bureaucratic responses. If she demanded documentation, if she threatened to escalate her inquiries to higher authorities, Williams might be forced to provide answers that could compromise my position. I can handle whatever volumes you're moving, I told Santos, committing to an agreement that would put me at the center of a distribution network spanning multiple states. My infrastructure is scalable. Excellent. Then we proceed with the initial shipment today. The operation was accelerating beyond the timeline we'd planned, forcing decisions that should have been made with careful deliberation. But criminal organizations operated on their own schedules, adapting to opportunities and threats with ruthless efficiency. What about payment structure? I asked, buying time while processing the implications of immediate deployment. Standard arrangements, 30% advance, 70% on delivery confirmation. Financial transfers through established channels. Rodriguez's voice interrupted again. Brooks, Williams needs to speak with you immediately. The situation with your sister is escalating. I couldn't respond verbally without alerting Santos to my communications, but the urgency in Rodriguez's tone suggested that Amanda's visit had created complications beyond simple verification requests. If she'd revealed details about the private investigation, if she'd shared photographs or surveillance reports, if she'd demanded access to classified information about ongoing operations, the security breach could be expanding exponentially. Santos was studying my face with the intensity of someone reading a poker opponent. You seem concerned about something. Just running numbers. This represents a significant expansion of my operations. Success requires calculated risk. The people who work with us understand that hesitation indicates weakness. Another implicit threat, delivered with the confidence of someone who'd eliminated hesitant partners before. Santos wasn't just evaluating my capacity to move drugs. He was assessing my commitment to the criminal lifestyle that required abandoning conventional morality and legal constraints. My phone rang, Williams's direct line, a call I couldn't ignore without risking everything I'd worked to build. But answering it in front of Santos would expose communications that could only belong to law enforcement. Excuse me, I said, stepping toward a stack of shipping containers that would provide momentary privacy. Business call. Santos nodded, but his security men shifted position to maintain visual contact. I was being watched, evaluated, tested in ways that could determine whether I left the warehouse alive. Williams, I answered quietly. Brooks, your sister is demanding proof that you're a federal agent. She's threatening to contact congressional oversight committees if we don't provide documentation. Congressional oversight. Amanda wasn't just seeking verification. She was escalating to political authorities who could mandate disclosure of classified information. Her legal training had taught her exactly which pressure points to apply when dealing with federal bureaucracy. Can you contain it? Not indefinitely. She's prepared to make this a public issue if necessary. I thought about Santos watching me from across the warehouse, about Morales counting packages of narcotics, about the distribution network that would disperse poison across American communities if this operation failed. Amanda's determination to verify my identity could destroy months of work and cost thousands of lives. Give me 2 hours, I said. Brooks, I can't stall congressional inquiries for 2 hours. Then don't stall them. Confirm that I'm a federal agent. That would compromise your cover completely. My cover's already compromised. My sister hired private investigators who photographed federal operations. Whether the compromise comes from her verification requests, or from criminal organizations discovering those photographs, the result is the same. Williams was quiet for a moment, probably calculating the same risk assessments that had been keeping me awake for the past week. If we confirm your identity to satisfy your sister's demands, we'll have to extract you from the field immediately. Not immediately. Give me 2 hours to conclude this operation, then extract me. That's extremely dangerous. If Santos suspects law enforcement involved, then I'll handle Santos. But I won't let 8 years of work be wasted because my family couldn't mind their own business. I ended the call and walked back towards Santos, who was examining shipping schedules with the focused attention of someone managing a complex logistics operation. Criminal enterprises required the same organizational skills as legitimate businesses, the ability to coordinate production, transportation, and distribution across multiple jurisdictions and time zones. Apologies for the interruption, I said. Final arrangements for my end of the operation. Good. We proceed immediately with the initial shipment. Morales will coordinate the transportation details. Rodriguez's voice provided tactical updates through the earpiece. All units in position. We're ready to move on your signal. The moment had arrived, the convergence of months of planning and years of preparation. Everything I'd sacrificed to reach this point, every lie I'd told my family, every risk I'd taken with my safety was about to be justified by arrests that would save lives and dismantle networks, or destroyed by family members who couldn't understand that love sometimes required distance. Santos, I said, activating the recording devices that would document his criminal activities for federal prosecutor. I need to understand the full scope of your organization before I commit to this partnership. What do you want to know? Everything. Supply chains, distribution networks, financial structures. If we're going to work together, I need to understand how your operation functions. Santos smiled, apparently pleased by my thoroughness. For the next hour, he provided detailed explanations of cartel operations, identifying suppliers and distributors, describing transportation routes and security measures. Everything was recorded, documented, preserved for use in prosecutions that would dismantle the infrastructure he'd spent decades building. When local law enforcement moved in, when federal agents surrounded the warehouse and placed Santos and Morales under arrest, when months of undercover work culminated in the kind of successful operation that justified every sacrifice I'd made, I felt nothing but exhaustion. The adrenaline that had sustained me through dangerous meetings and life-threatening deceptions drained away, leaving only the weight of decisions that had cost me my family's trust and understanding. Watching Santos led away in handcuffs, I wondered if the lives we'd saved were worth the relationships I'd destroyed. 3 weeks later, I sat in a coffee shop near the Phoenix Federal Courthouse, waiting for Rachel to arrive for a meeting I wasn't sure either of us wanted to have. The Morales-Santos operation had concluded with 47 arrests and the seizure of enough narcotics to supply addiction epidemics for months. The intelligence we'd gathered had led to additional operations across 3 states, disrupting trafficking networks that had operated with impunity for years. Amanda had eventually received official confirmation of my federal employment, but only after the operation concluded, and my cover was no longer necessary. The revelation had satisfied her demand for verification, while creating new sources of resentment about the deception that had preceded it. Rachel arrived with coffee and the tentative smile of someone hoping for reconciliation, while expecting disappointment. "You look better," she said, settling into the chair across from me. "Less like you're carrying the weight of the world, different weight now, smaller but more personal." Any word from Amanda or Mom? Mom calls sometimes. We talk about weather and neighborhood news, nothing substantial. Amanda's still processing everything. And Kevin? Kevin follows Amanda's lead, always Rachel nodded, understanding family dynamics that had been shaped by years of interaction and couldn't be changed by single revelations. "What happens now? With your job, I mean. Reassignment to a different field office, new identity, new cover, new operation, the work continued. And with us, with the family." I thought about the question that had been haunting me since the night of revelations at Mom's house. I don't know. Trust once broken is difficult to rebuild. I lied to you for 8 years, even if I had good reason. You all planned to betray me to federal authorities, even if you thought you were helping. We made mistakes. We all made mistakes. The question is whether we can make different ones going forward. Rachel reached across the table, covering my hand with hers the way she'd done when we were children, and one of us needed comfort. "I want to try. Even knowing that I'll probably have to lie to you again, that my next assignment will require the same secrecy, the same distance, the same barriers between my professional and personal life. Even knowing that it wasn't a solution, but it was a beginning. The coffee shop buzzed with ordinary conversations between people who told each other the truth about their jobs and their lives, people who didn't carry federal badges, or infiltrate criminal organizations, or sacrifice family relationships for the greater good. I envied them sometimes, but I didn't regret the choices that had led me away from that kind of ordinary existence. The work mattered, even when it cost everything. The lives we saved, the communities we protected, the networks we dismantled, all of it justified the personal sacrifices that came with the badge. But sitting there with Rachel, feeling the warmth of family connection that I'd almost lost forever, I realized the sacrifices didn't have to be complete. Some relationships could survive deception if both sides committed to understanding, rather than judgment, to forgiveness, rather than resentment. My phone buzzed with a text from my new supervisor. Assignment briefing tomorrow, 0800. Welcome to the Seattle field office. Seattle, a new city, a new cover identity, a new criminal organization to infiltrate. The work continued, as it always did, as it always would, but this time, I wouldn't be completely alone. This time, I'd have Rachel's understanding, if not her knowledge, to sustain me through whatever deceptions became necessary. I thought about my father's leather jacket hanging in my closet, about the lessons he'd taught me in the garage while we worked on engines together. Sometimes the most important work happened where people couldn't see it, he'd said. The parts that kept everything running smooth, nobody noticed them until they broke down. Maybe that was enough. Maybe being noticed wasn't as important as being effective. Maybe family was less about complete honesty than it was about complete commitment to each other's well-being, even when that commitment required difficult choices. Rachel squeezed my hand one more time before letting go. Be safe in Seattle. I'll try, and maybe call me sometime. Not about anything important, just to check in. I'd like that. We finished our coffee in comfortable silence, two sisters who'd found a way to love each other despite everything that had tried to drive them apart. It wasn't the ending I'd imagined when I'd first put on the badge 8 years ago, but it was better than the ending I'd feared 3 weeks ago. Outside the coffee shop, Phoenix stretched toward the horizon in every direction, a city full of people who went about their daily lives, unaware of the battles fought in shadows to keep them safe. Tomorrow I'd board a plane to Seattle, where new battles waited, and new sacrifices would be required. But tonight, for the first time in years, I felt like I belonged somewhere. Not completely, not without reservations, but enough to sustain me through whatever came next. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.